to have a session on disaster management, a relevant topic for the current scenario. And we are blessed to have the resource person, Dr. Rakhi R, Assistant Professor, NSS College, Pantanam. Dr. Rakhi took her PhD in cosmology from School of Pure and Applied Physics, NG University, in 2012. During 2013-14, she was visitor at Department of Florida State University, USA. From 2014 to 16, she worked as scientist for Ministry of Earth Sciences and in the field of numerical weather prediction. From 2016 to 19, she worked as Assistant Professor, Physics Department, NSS College, Cherthala. And from 2019 onward, in NSS College, Pantanam. So it's an honor for me to welcome Dr. Rakhi R on behalf of our department. Miss, a hearty welcome for you. Miss, shall we start the session?
Thank you, Divya. Hope all of you can hear me.
Audible.
കേൾക്കാൻ പറ്റുന്നുണ്ടോ? Okay. So first of all, let me thank Dr. Rosalina for inviting me. തുടങ്ങാമല്ലോ അല്ലേ റോസലിന ടീച്ചർ? സ്ക്രീൻ കാണാൻ പറ്റുന്നുണ്ടോ?
കാണാം മിസ്സേ, കാണാൻ പറ്റുന്നുണ്ട്.
So once again, thank you. So let's move on to the topic, disaster readiness. So before starting, let's see some of the introduction to the disaster. What is a disaster? നമ്മൾ എപ്പോഴും വിചാരിക്കാറുണ്ട്, എപ്പോഴും കേൾക്കാറുള്ള വാക്കാണ്. മലയാളത്തിൽ നമ്മൾ ദുരന്തം, അത്യാഹിതം എന്നൊക്കെ പറയും. So the dictionary meaning is calamity, or it's a sudden or great misfortune. And the WHO has defined disaster as any occurrence that causes damage, economic destruction, loss of human life, and deterioration in health and health services on scale sufficient to warrant an extraordinary response from outside the affected community area. So these disasters could be natural, such as earthquake, floods, droughts, or cyclones, and it can either be man-made also. That is, its direct or principal causes could be identified human actions or environmental fallouts of industry or commercial establishment, etc. Before going into the detail, I think we should learn some of the basic terms associated with disaster. The first one of it is the risk. Risk എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ അപകട സാധ്യത. That is, it's a measure of unexpected losses due to hazardous event. It can depend on the nature of the hazard, vulnerability of the elements which are affected, or economic value of those elements. For example, നമ്മളിപ്പോൾ ഒരു റീസെന്റ് നടന്ന ഫ്ലഡ് കൺസിഡർ ചെയ്യുവാണെങ്കിൽ അതിന്റെ റിസ്ക് നമ്മൾ മെഷർ ചെയ്യുന്നത് ആ ഫ്ലഡ് നടക്കാൻ വേണ്ടി അതിന്റെ എന്ത് ടൈപ്പ് ഓഫ് നേച്ചറാണ് അതിനകത്ത് സംഭവിക്കുക, എത്രത്തോളം നാശനഷ്ടങ്ങൾ സംഭവിക്കുന്നുണ്ട്, ഏതൊക്കെ ആൾക്കാരെയാണ് അത് എഫക്ട് ചെയ്യുക, അല്ലെ ഏതൊക്കെ ഏരിയസിനെ എഫക്ട് ചെയ്യും, economic losses എത്രത്തോളം ഉണ്ട് എന്നുള്ള കാര്യങ്ങളൊക്കെ മെഷർ ചെയ്തിട്ടാണ് we are calculating the risk factor. And the second term is the hazards, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ അപകടം എന്ന് നമ്മൾ പറയും. It's a phenomena that poses a threat to people, structure or economic assets, or which may even cause a disaster. ഒരു ഡിസാസ്റ്റർ ഉണ്ടാവാനായിട്ടുള്ള കാരണങ്ങൾ, എന്തൊക്കെ കാരണം കൊണ്ടാണ് ഒരു ഡിസാസ്റ്റർ ഉണ്ടാവുക എന്നുള്ളത് തീരുമാനിക്കുന്ന മെഷറാണ് ഹസാർഡ്സ്. അല്ലെങ്കിൽ അതിനെ നമ്മൾ ടെക്നിക്കലി എക്സ്പ്ലെയിൻ ചെയ്യുന്ന യൂസ് ചെയ്യുന്ന ഒരു വാക്കാണ് ഹസാർഡ്സ്. ആൻഡ് ദ തേർഡ് ടേം ഈസ് വൾനറബിലിറ്റി. Vulnerability is the predisposition of a community or a structure or service or any geographical area to damage on account of their nature, construction, and proximity to hazards, terrain, or disaster-prone area. വൾണറബിലിറ്റി എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ നമ്മൾ ഉദ്ദേശിക്കുന്നത് എത്രത്തോളം പ്രോൺ ആണ് ഒരു സ്ഥലം, എത്രത്തോളം ദുർബലമാണ് ഡിസാസ്റ്റേഴ്സ് അഫക്ട് ചെയ്യാൻ വേണ്ടി, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ അതിന് എത്രത്തോളം ഡാമേജസ് ഉണ്ടാവാം, ഇക്കോണമിക് നഷ്ടങ്ങൾ, റിസ്ക് എത്ര കൂടുതലാണ് എന്നൊരു ഏരിയ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഒരു കമ്മ്യൂണിറ്റി എത്രത്തോളം അഫക്റ്റഡ് ആകും എന്ന് നമ്മൾ തീരുമാനിക്കുന്ന ഒരു ടേം ആണ് വൾണറബിലിറ്റി. ഹൗ the area will be a disaster prone. Then we should go into the classification between emergency and disaster. നമുക്ക് എപ്പോഴും തെറ്റിദ്ധരിക്കപ്പെടുന്ന രണ്ട് വാക്കുകളാണ് എമർജൻസിയും ഡിസാസ്റ്ററും. പലപ്പോഴും നമ്മൾ വിചാരിക്കും both are the same. But there is a certain difference between emergency and disaster. That is, the difference lies in the level of response. That is, emergency is a situation in which the community is capable of coping. ഒരു പ്രോബ്ലം ഉണ്ടായിക്കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ അതിനെ എത്രത്തോളം നേരിടാൻ ആ കമ്മ്യൂണിറ്റിക്ക് പറ്റും എന്നുള്ള ഒരു സിറ്റുവേഷൻ. ഇഫ് വി ക്യാൻ കോപ്പ് അപ്പ് വിത്ത് ദ സിറ്റുവേഷൻ, വി ക്യാൻ സേ ഇറ്റ് ഈസ് എൻ എമർജൻസി സിറ്റുവേഷൻ, or it can be managed at the local level. But on the other words, disaster, it's a situation in which the community is incapable of coping. Disaster എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ simply if we say it is an emergency with greater magnitude or longer duration, it happens for the massive people, or the disaster is a massive happening, and the emergency can be generated by real or imminent occurrence of an event that requires immediate attention. However, the disaster is occurred due to a natural or man-made events which causes the intense negative impacts on the goods, services, or any other environmental. And the emergency requires immediate attention of the emergency resources. That is, നമുക്കൊരു ലോക്കൽ ബോഡിയുടെ സഹായം emergency situation handle ചെയ്യാൻ വേണ്ടി. But in the case of a disaster, we need a massive support from the international agencies, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഗവൺമെന്റിന്റെ സപ്പോർട്ട്സിന്റെ ഒക്കെ ആവശ്യമുണ്ട്. So this is the difference between an emergency situation and a disaster. In short, the disaster is an emergency with greater magnitude or longer duration with massive happening. Now, I have already mentioned that disasters are classified as two types. One is the natural disaster, and the other is the man-made disaster. The natural disaster is a result of naturally occurring processes, such as the natural disaster can further classified as meteorological, geological, environmental, or biological. This meteorological occurs as a result of the process in the atmosphere. This includes extreme temperature, cyclones, etc. And some of the examples are flood, hurricane, typhoon, storm, all those things we will be discussing in later slides. And the second type of natural disaster is the geological disaster. It occurs because of the geological process such as movement in the tectonic plates or volcanic activity. This can be due to process at the surface of the earth or below the surface of the earth. നമുക്ക് കേട്ടിട്ടുണ്ട് earthquake, volcanic eruptions, landslides, etc. are some of the examples of geological disasters. And the third type is environmental disaster അല്ലെങ്കിൽ biological disaster. This happens due to the biological process of the earth, and it primarily involves the spread of diseases, epidemic disease അല്ലെങ്കിൽ pandemics, or പാൻഡമിക് പറയുമ്പോൾ നമ്മൾ അറിയാം, എപ്പിഡമിക്സ് സാംക്രമിക രോഗമാണ്, പാൻഡമിക് പകർച്ചവ്യാധി. അതായത് നമ്മൾ പറയാറുണ്ട് എപ്പിഡമിക്സ് എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞു കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ എപ്പിഡമിക്സ് വിത്ത് പാസ്പോർട്ട് ആണ്. അത് പി സ്റ്റാൻഡ്സ് ഫോർ പാസ്പോർട്ട് ആണ് പാൻഡമിക്. നമ്മൾ ഓർത്തിരിക്കാൻ വേണ്ടി പറയും. ദാറ്റ് ഈസ് പാൻഡമിക് എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞു കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ ഇറ്റ് ഈസ് ആൻ എപ്പിഡമിക് സ്പ്രെഡ് ഓവർ മൾട്ടിപ്പിൾ കൺട്രീസ്. ഇപ്പൊ സംഭവിച്ചിരിക്കുന്ന COVID-19 ഈസ് എ പാൻഡമിക് because it is spread over multiple countries. And for an epidemics എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞു കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ it affects a large number of people within a community. And third, some of the biological disasters are the endemic. It belongs to particular people, and sometimes there will be a greater than the anticipated increase in the number of endemic cases. In that time, we'll call it as an outbreak. Then environmental causes can be the climate change, global warming, but it is also considered as a meteorological disaster. And then the second classification is the man-made disaster. Man-made disaster, it is caused by the involvement of those humankind, or it's a direct or principal causes, could be the identified human actions. It can be deliberate action or otherwise, like industrial accidents, environmental fallouts of an industry. അങ്ങനെയുള്ള അതായത് ഒരു ഇൻഡസ്ട്രിയിൽ നടക്കുന്ന പോയ്സൺ ഇഷ്യൂസ് അതൊക്കെ മാൻമെയ്ഡ് ഡിസാസ്റ്റേഴ്സ് ആണ്. സോ ഇറ്റ് ഈസ് ക്ലാസിഫൈഡ് ആസ് 3 types. One is the technological disaster, then industrial, and the warfare. In technological disaster means there should be some transport accidents or the structure failures, explosion, fire ഒക്കെ നടക്കുന്നത് technological issues ആണ്. When industrial എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞു കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ chemical spills അല്ലെങ്കിൽ radiations, poisoning, gas leaks, etc. are the some of the examples of industrial disaster. And the third one is warfare. When warfare, the name itself we can understand it is due to the war or terrorism or internal conflicts, civil unrest. All those things could be coming under the category of warfare. So our primary interest is the natural disaster. So let's look on to what are the natural hazards and natural disasters. These are due to the naturally occurring process that have operated throughout the Earth's history. And these are classified into certain types. One is the geological hazards, which we have already said that it is occurred because of the geological process, such as the movement of tectonic plates or volcanic activity. And the second type is the atmospheric hazard. The third category is insect infestations, disease epidemics, wildfire, and anthropogenic hazards. And these geological hazards include earthquakes. There is a change earthquake. We normally say it's earth is considered as a puzzle. Jigsaw puzzles നിങ്ങൾ കളിച്ചിട്ടുണ്ടാവും ചെറിയ പ്രായത്തിലൊക്കെ. So the jigsaw puzzle ഒരു 20-piece puzzle എടുക്കുകയാണെങ്കിൽ it is considered as an earth. അതിനകത്ത് puzzles അതുപോലെ ഇരിക്കുകയല്ല. There should be some movements in those puzzles. So each puzzle is called the tectonic plates. And these tectonic plates are continuously moving. മൂവ് ചെയ്തുകൊണ്ടേയിരിക്കുകയാണ്, എപ്പോഴും സംഭവിക്കുന്നുണ്ട്. ബട്ട് when this movement happens very in a large scale, or sometimes these tectonic plates ever heat or bump or slide apart, and if the rate is much larger, then we will have an earthquake in a larger scale. At that time only we will feel that earthquake happened. All the time these movements are happening, but that we cannot feel because the movement is very small. Sometimes നമ്മൾ കേൾക്കാറുണ്ട് ചെറിയ റിക്ടർ സ്കെയിലിൽ വളരെ ചെറിയ earthquake എന്ന് രേഖപ്പെടുത്തിയിട്ടുണ്ട്. പക്ഷേ ഈ പിക്ചർ കാണുന്ന പോലെ ഇതുപോലെയുള്ള ലാർജർ ഡിസ്ട്രക്ഷൻസ് ഒക്കെ സംഭവിക്കണമെങ്കിൽ earthquakeന്റെ മാഗ്നിറ്റ്യൂഡ് വളരെ കൂടുതലായിരിക്കണം. That is the movement of this very large. It's in the hitting, okay, സംഭവിക്കുന്നത് വളരെ കൂടുതലാണെങ്കിൽ that time it is called an earthquake. And another thing is the volcanic eruption. The volcanic eruption picture ആണ് സൈഡിൽ കാണിച്ചിരിക്കുക. We know that the volcanoes are formed by eruptions of lava or ashes when the magnitude rises through the cracks or weak spots in the earth crust. Magma, it's a molten rock. So it is formed when the earth mantle melts. So this melting can happen when the tectonic plates are pulling apart. So we can say that the volcanic eruption is a cause of earthquake. It can be caused due to earthquake. So in the geological hazard is earthquake is of most important because it causes the secondary effects of disasters. And the third one is tsunami. We have already familiar with and we have already faced the situation of tsunami. It is formed due to the sudden movement of ocean floor, and it is also associated with the earthquake. When the earthquake happens, there is a sudden movement of the ocean flow, and then the water level will rise very high, and it is not the primary wave which is causing this damage, but it is the secondary waves which are rising up and which is causing damage to the land when it reaches the land. And the fourth one is the landslide. It's also associated with the earthquake, or it can happen due to the flood. So the picture clearly shows what is a landslide. Sometimes the underground sand or soil will move apart, which happens the upper layers to fall apart. So this time the land can be sliding. It's clear in the picture, and the landslide can be considered as a man-made and a natural disaster, because these days many people are taking the land for and digging up the land for building construction, etc. This will cause the surrounding places to slide to the upper high regions to slide towards the lower region, which can cause this landslide. And next one is the flood. Flood also, this is a picture of the recent flood happened in Kerala. This also happened associated with when there is sudden rise in the water level associated with the rain or something like that. So at that time also the hazards or the disaster will be of greater thing. It will affect a larger community. Then the last one is the subsidence. Subsidence, it's a gradual setting or sudden sinking of the earth surface. Subsidence പറഞ്ഞാൽ ഇത് നമ്മൾ പലപ്പോഴും റോഡിലോ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഒരു subsidence can be of many types, because it can be ground subsidence അല്ലെങ്കിൽ building subsidence. And building subsidence തന്നെ നമ്മളുടെ വീടുകളിൽ തന്നെ പലപ്പോഴും കാണാറുണ്ട്. ബിൽഡിങ്സിന്റെ ഭിത്തിയിലൊക്കെ ക്രാക്സ് ഉണ്ടാവും. It is called the subsidence. It can be also resulting from the earthquake. Earthquake ശേഷം buildings നോക്കുകയാണെങ്കിൽ there can be some cracks ഉണ്ടാവും. It is called the sudden sinking of the earth surface. അതിനെയാണ് നമ്മൾ സബ്സിഡൻസ് എന്ന് പറയുക. Another reason is the erosions ഒക്കെ ഉണ്ടാവുന്നത് subsidence ഉണ്ടാക്കാൻ കാരണമാവും. So these are the geological hazards. One is the earthquake, volcanic eruptions, tsunami, landslide, flood, and subsidence. Then the another category we mentioned in the natural hazard is the atmospheric hazard. Atmospheric hazards are the primary thing is the tropical cyclones. Tropical cyclones is the name has, it is a hurricane, but if it happens to the tropical regions, it is called the tropical cyclones. We can see this is the anatomy of a tropical cyclone. So for the creation of a tropical cyclone, we need mainly three conditions. One is the warm water, and the another thing is the instability, and third one is the mid-level moisture. So it forms when the warm water ocean forms at the warm water near the equator. So the warm air above the ocean rises upward. Warm air rises upward. You can see in this picture, the warm air rises upward. Then it creates an area of low pressure. So that time the air from the surrounding regions will push in and fill the area with the low pressure, which will become the warm moist air. And this air will rise again, and as the moisture rises, surrounding air will fall into the low pressure area. Then this process continues until the water and the air forms clouds. And the center of the cyclone is called the eye, and the surrounding region of the eye is called eye wall. And surrounding to eye wall, there is a rain clouds. Those causes the rainfall after the cyclone event. And the second one is the tornadoes. Tornadoes are also rapidly rotating column of air which is formed under a big thunderstorm or the supercells. So you can see the tornado's anatomy. It forms when two large air masses of varying temperature and humidity collide with warm air in the lower layer and cold air in the upper layer. That is the initial funnel which hovers to the surface, grows into a thundercloud. Then, if the conditions are favorable or the temperature there is a temperature swings or wind shear occurs, a tornado takes shapes and reaches the earth. When these conditions start to change, the funnel narrows and starts to rise gradually towards the cloud. And the tornadoes are classified as water spout, land spout, and multiple vortex, etc. And drought, we don't need any further explanation for the drought because it is a prolonged period with less than average amount of rain or snow in a particular region. ഒരു പ്രത്യേക സ്ഥലത്ത് മഴ കിട്ടാതാവുമ്പോൾ there will be the shortage of water happens, or that time the surface will become drier than the normal conditions that can eventually lead to the water supply problems. And really hot temperatures can make a drought worse by causing the moisture to evaporate from the soil. So these droughts can occur only when the area is abnormally dry. So when a particular area gets less rain than usual, the soil gets much less moisture also, the soil start drying out and the plants die. When this pattern continues for several weeks or months or in years, the flow of streams and river decreases and the water levels in the lakes or reservoir will also diminish. Eventually, the unusual dry weather causes the water supply issues and the dry period becomes a drought. Then the thunderstorms, which we are very familiar and we have studied from the small classes, and thunderstorms are associated with the lightning. These are called the atmospheric hazards. Now another type, instead of these natural disasters that like geological hazards or the atmospheric hazards or the anthropogenic hazards. Anthropogenic hazards means it occurs as a result of human interaction with the environment. These are like technological hazards which occur due to exposure to hazardous substance such as radon, mercury. These also include other hazards that have been formed through some human interaction such as acid rains, etc. Contamination of the atmosphere or surface water, etc. are called the anthropogenic hazards. So these things are the classified as a natural disaster. Now our interest moves on to the health emergencies. Instead of these natural hazards, there are certain disasters which can happen due to the health emergencies. Because the humans interact with the environment constantly, so these interactions affect quality of life or the years of healthy life lived and health disparities. നമ്മളുടെ ചുറ്റുപാടുമായിട്ട് നമ്മളുടെ മനുഷ്യന്മാരുടെ interactions, it can happen to the quality of life. നമ്മൾ excess use, നമ്മൾ എപ്പോഴും പറയും വാഹനങ്ങളുടെ excess use കൊണ്ട് പൊല്യൂഷൻസ് ഉണ്ടാവാം. അതുപോലെയുള്ള ഹ്യൂമൻ ഇന്ററാക്ഷൻ വിത്ത് എൻവയോൺമെന്റ് ആണ് ഹെൽത്ത് എമർജൻസിക്ക് ഒരു റീസൺ ആയിട്ട് കാണുക. ദാറ്റ് ഈസ് ദ environmental factors such as air, water, and soil pollution, or the chemical exposure, climate change, and UV radiation, ultraviolet radiations contribute to more than 100 diseases and injuries according to the World Health Organization. The air pollution continues to pose a significant threat to the health worldwide, and this environmental health consists of preventing or controlling disease, injury, disability related to interactions between people and their surroundings. And of this, the important thing is the air quality. Poor air quality is linked to premature death, cancer, and long-term damage to respiratory, cardiovascular systems, etc. Many of us are facing this kind of asthmatic issue because of the pollution in the air. നമ്മൾ വാർത്തകളിലൊക്കെ കണ്ടിട്ടുണ്ടായില്ലേ, ഡൽഹിയിലൊക്കെ പൊല്യൂഷൻ കൂടി, അതുകൊണ്ട് ഒരുപാട് പേർക്ക് ആസ്മറ്റിക് പ്രോബ്ലംസ് ആണ്, റെസ്പിറേറ്ററി ഇഷ്യൂസ് ആണ് എന്നൊക്കെ. ആൻഡ് സോ ദ ഡിസ്പ്ലേസിംഗ് ദ air pollution is an important step in creating the healthy environment. And the second thing is the surface and groundwater. So surface and groundwater quality concerns apply to both drinking water and recreational waters, or the contamination by infectious agents or chemicals can cause mild to severe illness. RO waters, നമ്മൾ റീഓക്സിഡൈസ്ഡ് വാട്ടർ സർവീസ് നമ്മൾ കണ്ടു, ബോർവെൽ വാട്ടറിനകത്ത് കൂടുതൽ മിനറൽസ് ഉണ്ടാവും. സോ ഇറ്റ് ക്യാൻ നമുക്ക് ഡയറക്ട്ലി ഡ്രിങ്ക് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റില്ല. അങ്ങനെയുള്ള സിറ്റുവേഷൻസിലൊക്കെ വി ആർ യൂസിങ് പല ടൈപ്പ് ഓഫ് ഫിൽറ്റേഴ്സ് നമ്മൾ യൂസ് ചെയ്യാറുണ്ട്, UV ഫിൽറ്റർ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ RO വാട്ടർ. പ്രത്യേകിച്ച് നമ്മൾ ആലപ്പുഴ റീജിയനിൽ നമ്മൾ കൂടുതലായിട്ടും വെള്ളത്തിന്റെ ഒരു പ്രശ്നം നമ്മൾ പറയാറുണ്ട്. അപ്പോൾ അവിടെയാണ് കൂടുതൽ നമ്മൾ ഫിൽറ്റേഴ്സ് ഒക്കെ യൂസ് ചെയ്യുന്നത്. ഇറ്റ് ഈസ് ഓൾസോ അനദർ കോസ് ഓഫ് എ ഡിസാസ്റ്റർ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ എമർജൻസി ആണ്. ലോങ് ടേം ഇറ്റ് ക്യാൻ അഫക്ട് ദ ഹെൽത്ത്. So protecting water sources and minimizing exposure to the contaminated water sources are important parts of environment health. And the next one is the climate change in the health emergency. That is climate change. Climate change, if we say climate, don't confuse with the word weather. So climate means it is not the daily change. പലപ്പോഴും നമ്മൾ കൊളോക്കിയലി സംസാരിക്കുമ്പോൾ ടുഡേസ് ക്ലൈമറ്റ് ഇസ് നോട്ട് ഗുഡ്, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഇന്ന് ശരിയല്ല, ക്ലൈമറ്റ് മോശമാണെന്ന് പറയും. പക്ഷെ ഈ ഡെയിലി പാറ്റേൺസിനെ നമ്മൾ വിളിക്കുന്നത് വെതർ എന്നാണ്. Climate is the long-term effect of this weather. So this long-term change in the weather can happen in the social and environmental determinants of health, or clean air, safe drinking water, sufficient food and secure shelter, etc. can be affected by the climate change. According to World Health Organization, between 2030 and 2050, climate change is expected to cause approximately 250,000 additional deaths per year from malnutrition, malaria, diarrhea, and heat stress, etc. And another factor is the extreme heat. Extreme high temperature contribute directly to death from cardiovascular respiratory disease, particularly among elderly people. This high temperature also raise the levels of ozone and other pollutants in the air that exacerbate cardiovascular and respiratory disease. And pollen and another aeroallergen levels are also higher in extreme heat. This can trigger asthma, which affects around 300 million people. Temperature increases are expected to aggravate this burden. Then coming to the final part, it is the radiation emergency. So the radiation emergency we are familiar with which can happen in a in the household time. Also we can feel this radiation. പൊള്ളലേൽക്കുക, അങ്ങനെയുള്ള കാര്യങ്ങളൊക്കെ നമുക്ക് എപ്പോഴും നമുക്ക് ഡെയിലി ലൈഫിൽ പോലും സംഭവിക്കുന്ന എമർജൻസീസ് ആണ്. So this radiation can kill or damage the living things, as many of the billions of cells in the human body are replaced every day. Minor exposure to radiation may have little or no effect. അത് ചെറുതായിട്ട് നമ്മൾ കൈയൊന്നും കുക്ക് ചെയ്യുന്ന സമയത്തോ അല്ലാതെ ഏതെങ്കിലും സമയത്ത് ചെറുതായിട്ടുള്ള മുറിവുകൾ സംഭവിക്കുമ്പോൾ it will not have any threat to our life, because there are billions of cells are replaced every day. So this minor exposure cannot have a long time effect, or it can have a harmful effect to the body. And major exposure to radiation can have health effects, which can be divided into two parts. One is the deterministic effects or the acute effects, and the second classification is the stochastic effect or the late effects. This happens for an individual. Because these you can see the title itself I have written, radiation emergencies. It's not a disaster because it is affecting only a minor community or the set of people. കുറച്ച് ആൾക്കാർക്ക് അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഒരു ഇൻഡിവിജ്വലിന് മാത്രം സംഭവിക്കുന്ന കാര്യമാണ്. So in that situations we are treating it as an emergency. So this deterministic effect, like acute effects, can include skin burns, radiation sickness, and death. The death happens because of this radiation exposure. And the stochastic effect include cancers and inheritable defects that results from damage to genetic material in cells. And these radiation emergencies can have severe psychological effects on the victims also. നമ്മൾ ആസിഡ് വീണ് പൊള്ളലേൽക്കുന്നു എന്ന് പറയുന്ന ഒരുപാട് വാർത്തകൾ കേൾക്കാറുണ്ട്. അങ്ങനെയുള്ള സിറ്റുവേഷനിൽ അവർക്കുണ്ടാകുന്ന സൈക്കോളജിക്കൽ ഇഷ്യൂസ്. So that also can be treated as an emergency. So it can have severe psychological effects as a fear of an unfamiliar, invisible, and potentially terrible danger causes acute stress. Such stress and associated problems can arise even when the radiation exposure is very low or insignificant. എപ്പോഴും നമുക്ക് സംഭവിക്കണമെന്നില്ല. കൂടുതലും ബ്യൂട്ടി കോൺഷ്യസ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള ആൾക്കാർക്ക് ചെറിയൊരു പാട് അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഏതെങ്കിലും ഒരു പൊള്ളലേറ്റ് കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ തന്നെ വി ആർ അണ്ടർ സ്ട്രെസ്. എങ്ങനെ മാറും, എപ്പോ മാറും എന്ന് മുതലായുള്ള സ്ട്രെസ്സും ഇറ്റ് ഈസ് ഓൾസോ കൺസിഡർഡ് ആസ് ആൻ എമർജൻസി. സോ ഈ പിക്ചർ കാണിക്കുന്നത് ഒരു റേഡിയേഷൻ എക്സ്പോഷർ ഓരോ പാർട്ടിനെയും എങ്ങനെയൊക്കെ അഫക്ട് ചെയ്യും എന്നുള്ള ഒരു സ്കീമാറ്റിക് പിക്ചറാണ്. സോ the symptoms of radiation exposure, early symptoms are nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, headache, fever, etc. are the earlier symptoms, and later times this will happen, dizziness, weakness, hair loss, all those things happen. And so the major parts which are affecting this radiation exposure are the thyroid gland. In the thyroid gland is of high risk for the cancer because this thyroid absorbs the radioactive iodine. And another part is the lungs, which lung inflammation can happen, scarring has happened, and the red blood cells in stomach or the small intestine or large intestine, bone marrow, etc. are some of the parts which are severe prone to this radiation effects. So the exposure rates is there is a how we are treating all those things. It's given in this picture how we compare the exposure, background radiation and this radiation. These are the exposure level with and without medical care. This is how it is affecting all these dosages comparing to this. And if suppose we are affected with the radiation, we are exposed to a radiation, what should we do? Where should we go to in a radiation emergency? That is, if a radiation emergency happens in your area, first thing is you should get inside. That is the best way to prevent radiation injuries and illness is to get inside as soon as possible, away from the radioactive material, or outside, or shower or wash once inside. It is called a self-decontamination. So the safest action is to get inside, stay inside, like what we are doing these days, and stay tuned, because get aware of what happens to the surrounding. If we are on higher threat, we should inform someone else. All those things we should be very well aware also. And close and lock all the windows and doors. Go to the basement of the building. This happens when a radioactive material is exposed to the nature. So radioactive material settles on the outside of buildings. So the best thing is to do is stay as far as away from the walls and roof of the building as you can. And if possible, turn off fans, LCs, and air heating units, etc., which bring the air from the outside. And if you have skin burns, nausea, or begin vomiting shortly after the radiation exposure, seek medical attention as soon as it is safe to leave your building or place of shelter. വളരെ സിവിയർ ആയിട്ട് ഏതെങ്കിലും റേഡിയേഷൻസ് നമുക്ക് ഉണ്ടാവുകയാണെങ്കിൽ, ഇഫ് വി ആർ ഹാവിങ് early symptoms, നമ്മൾ മെഡിക്കൽ അറ്റൻഷൻ വാങ്ങണം. ബട്ട് medical attention before going to the outside, we should make sure that the outside area is very safe. So these symptoms may be of acute radiation syndrome, which is caused by the exposure to large amount of radiation over a short period of time. These symptoms can appear within minutes to several days after you were exposed to larger amount of radiation. Suppose if you are exposed to a small amount of radiation, you will not see any health effects right away, and you may not have any long-term health effects also. But you have to treat these non-radiation related cuts, bruises, injuries with first aids. Keep the cuts covered when washing to keep the material, the radiation out of the wound. So these are certain things we have to be careful while happening, because radiation emergency we are prone to it. കൂടുതൽ സമയം നമുക്ക് സംഭവിക്കാൻ പറ്റുന്ന ഒരു എമർജൻസിയാണ്. Now I am moving to the final slides. ഇതുവരെ നമ്മൾ കേട്ടത് we have been discussing the types of disaster. ഏതൊക്കെ ടൈപ്പ് ഡിസാസ്റ്റർ ആണുള്ളത്. That is the natural disasters നെ കുറിച്ച് ഡിസ്കസ് ചെയ്തു, and then we have discussed some of the health emergencies and radiation effects, etc. So we got a fundamental idea of what all disasters are happening to the society. Now we should know how we manage all these issues, how we are doing this disaster management. So the disaster management focuses on creating plans to decrease the impact of disasters. So the primary fundamental aspects of disaster management are preparedness, planning how to respond. Preparedness means how we respond to these disasters. Then the second one is the mitigation. Mitigation means we are minimizing the effects of disaster. And next one is the response. The third category is the response. It is the efforts to minimize the hazards created by a disaster. Then the fourth cycle is the recovery. In the recovery state, we have to bring the community to normal. നമുക്കറിയാം, നമ്മളെ കേരളത്തിൽ തന്നെ ഡിസാസ്റ്റർ മാനേജ്മെന്റ് ഒരു ഡിവിഷൻ തന്നെയുണ്ട്, കേരള സ്റ്റേറ്റ് ഡിസാസ്റ്റർ മാനേജ്മെന്റ് അതോറിറ്റി, KSDMA. They are doing all those things, this kind of 4 phases of these fundamental aspects of disaster management. We can see in this picture, the preparedness means early warning. We have to give early warning for the if there is some disaster is happening, we have to give warning to the people. Then in the mitigation process, it is the prevention. Mitigation means to prevent future emergencies and takes necessary steps to minimize their effects. It occurs before a disaster takes place. So the organization will take necessary steps to protect the people and property, while also they try to decrease the level of risk and consequences from a given disaster situation. So the organization's main goal is to reduce the vulnerability to disaster impacts, such as the property damage or injuries, or the loss of life, etc. And in the preparedness step also, we are taking necessary actions ahead of time to be ready for an emergency. Emergency ഉണ്ടാകുന്നതിന് മുമ്പ് തന്നെ we will take certain necessary how a disaster might affect overall the productivity. This will treating the life. So the organization will provide appropriate education for the people how to take care of these emergencies. Then the response I already mentioned, it is the step to protect the people and property in the wake of an emergency or in the case of a disaster. It occurs after immediate aftermath of a disaster. So the response happens after the disaster. So search and rescue process, then emergency relief, etc. will be providing, and the organizations will focus their attention on addressing immediate threats to people, property, or some economic losses, etc. Finally, the state is the recovery, that is the rebuilding. rebuilding after a disaster in an effort to return operations back to normal, returning the community to back to normal. So this phase takes place after the disaster. That is the pre-disaster, post-disaster. This response and recovery are the post-disaster events. So the pre-disaster events are the risk management, mitigation, etc. Then in the response stage, it is the happens after the disaster. So we'll do the warning and evacuation, saving the people, providing immediate assistance, assessing damage, and then post disaster we have to analyze all those things, how to recover the economic loss or physical loss, environmental loss, to bring the society to back to normal. So the recovery phase can last from 6 months or even longer, depending on the severity of the incident. Namakariam, Namala rebuild Kerala after the flood. It is still ongoing. So minimum 6 months mudala, it can take several years for the post-disaster recovery stage. So in post-disaster state, first thing we do is the restoration of infrastructure services, then reconstruction. If some severe damage is happened, we'll do the reconstructions. Then economic and social recovery, economic balance we have to keep up. Then the developments, and we have to do the risk assessment. Once if a disaster happens, we have to make some plans, strategies to not to repeat these disasters. All those things also, there's a detailed study for need to be happen and the post disaster state. So this is a basic idea of what is going around in our nature for in the disaster and how we will manage all those things. So I think I should I have given some basic introduction for you. So thank you and be stay safe. If you have any questions or doubts, you can ask me. കേൾക്കാൻ പറ്റുന്നുണ്ടോ?
കേൾക്കാം മിസ്റ്റർ.
ഓക്കെ.
എന്തെങ്കിലും ഡൗട്ട് ഉണ്ടെങ്കിൽ ചോദിക്കാം കേട്ടോ.
I think I have covered almost all the topics in your syllabus.
Yes, sir.
Correct.
മിസ്സേ എന്നാ വൈൻഡപ്പ് ചെയ്യാം മിസ്സേ.
ഓക്കെ ശരി, സംശയമൊന്നുമില്ലെങ്കിൽ വൈൻഡപ്പ്.
ഓക്കെ ഓക്കെ. ഓക്കെ മിസ്സേ. So
clear ആയോ?
ഓക്കെ ഓക്കെ. അപ്പൊ മിസ്സേ എന്നാ താങ്ക്സ് പറഞ്ഞേക്കട്ടെ മിസ്സേ.
ഓക്കെ, നിങ്ങൾക്ക് ഐഡിയാസ് എന്തെങ്കിലും ബേസിക് ഐഡിയ ക്ലിയർ ആയിട്ടുണ്ടോ എന്നറിയാൻ ഒരു ഫീഡ്ബാക്ക് അറിയാൻ ആഗ്രഹമുണ്ട്.
ആഭ ഒന്ന് പറയാമോ?
ഓക്കെ മാം, ക്ലാസ് വളരെ യൂസ്ഫുൾ ആയിരുന്നു. ഡിസാസ്റ്റർ മാനേജ്മെന്റ് ഒക്കെ നമ്മൾ യൂഷ്വലി ബോറടിച്ചിരുന്ന കേൾക്കുന്നതാണ്, പക്ഷെ ക്ലാസ് നല്ല ഇൻട്രസ്റ്റിംഗ് ആയിരുന്നു. കാര്യങ്ങളൊക്കെ മനസ്സിലായി, വളരെ ഇൻഫോർമേറ്റീവ് ആയിരുന്നു. താങ്ക് യു മാം.
Okay, thank you.
ആർക്കെങ്കിലും എന്തെങ്കിലും പറയാനുണ്ടോ? ഹലോ, okay, Miss. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks to Almighty for making this session so meaningful. And it's my pleasure to express thanks to Dr. Rakhia, Assistant Professor, NSS College. Thank you, Miss, for taking such a topic which was very relevant to the current situation. I am sure that the session was very useful to students who participated. And then I extend my thanks to our principal, Dr. Rita Lada, who supports us in all programs, and express gratitude to our HOD, Dr. Rosina Thomas, for taking steps for arranging classes like this. And I express my thanks to my colleagues of the department, and I express the thanks to all the students who participated in this program. Thank you, Miss. Thank you, Miss Rakhi.
Thank you.
Thank you.